How are you doing? I'm glad you're here today. Hey everybody, we have a wonderful guest here with us today. This is Amelia Herbst. She has joined us today to talk about social justice advocacy. Thank you for being here with us, Amelia. I appreciate you. And
Absolutely.
We are really, I'm really excited to have you on here because we actually got to meet in person at PAX South, and you were on a panel, and I'd already been following you on Twitter for a while. And when I saw you were on a panel, I was like, first of all, I have to go to the panel. But then second of all, I actually got to meet you in person, which was such a cool thing. So I appreciate you, first of all, taking the time after your panel to talk to me. And then second of all, agreeing to come on here with me.
Absolutely. We greatly appreciated you coming to the panel. I think it was one of those things that, you get to know people through Twitter and then especially through this mental health advocacy stuff. And then I remember seeing you and you came up with your wonderful question. And I was just like, yes, I know her. I definitely know her. So absolutely. You approaching me at the end and asking me to be on here was huge for me. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So Amelia is a psychotherapist working with underserved populations in community mental health. She's also a clinical psychology doctoral student at Chestnut Hill College in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Amelia's research focuses on aggression and violence in teens, young adults, and geek and gamer communities. Her research primarily focuses on personality and subcultural factors that contribute to retaliatory aggression in victims, and she is also very involved in social justice advocacy through her work as a therapist and her position on the board of a nonprofit called the Thelander Homestead, which I have a link to. And I'll be completely honest, whenever I first went to this website, I was like, wait, is this the right website? And then I started reading about it, and of course saw that you're on the board and everything. I started reading about it. It's a really cool thing that y'all are doing, so I was impressed when I saw that.
Thank you. I think we're going to talk about it later, but it's been an amazing part of my journey to get on the board of directors for them and be able to help them out.
Yeah. Amelia, we'll go ahead and just get started with what is potentially the easiest / the hardest question of the night, which is, why do you do what you do?
It's actually pretty interesting. This has been a really long journey for me to get here. I actually originally wanted to be an astronomer when I was a kid. I just loved stars, and it never panned out because I can't math, I think. That's how I ended up in psychology. But one of the things that actually drew me to the field was the shooting at Virginia Tech. And then learning about how there are individuals out there that think that they can do things to that extreme, to take other people out of this world, to cause harm to other people. And I'm like, well, why? So I ended up actually doing criminal justice and psychology at the same time. And right after undergrad, I ended up going into a residential treatment facility where I worked with aggressive and violent teenage boys. And honestly, the therapeutic aspect of it is what ultimately ended up just grounding me into the field after that, So from there on, I'm like, I think the therapy world is where I want to be in, even though I still want to have my research interests in violence and aggression. And then from there, it's just kind of spiraled into what I'm doing now, which is a bit of a jack of all trades, but I do have a focus on underserved populations and those that are violent and aggressive. And honestly, a lot of those populations typically tend to overlap. So that's why I'm here.
Yeah, I love stories where it's like I started off doing one thing and then it kind of morphed into this, because I feel like a lot of kids, and I say this, as a mom, I've seen my kids, even at their ages, struggle with it. Not the 6-year-old. Let's be real. He has no idea. But I see a lot of people struggle with, I don't know what to do with my life. And my answer to that is always, you just do. And then eventually you figure out what you actually enjoy and want to do. But you got to start somewhere. So I love those kinds of, I started off as this, and then it kind of went to this, and now I'm doing this. Those are great. Do you have a favorite serial killer?
All right. So we did talk about this prior to this. Mm-hmm. So I'm not just throwing this wonderful woman under the bus.
No, you're totally good.
I don't have a favorite serial killer. Due to the nature of the research that I do, I actually am very involved, kind of having my ear to the ground in communities that are violent and those that do perpetrate large violent acts. So a lot of the stuff that I'm actually keeping tabs on is mass murder. Specifically school shootings, specifically young individuals that feel disenfranchised, and then they choose to just unleash whatever emotions that they have onto innocent people. So since there's so much of me already mentally in that, the whole like favorite serial killer thing is just like
right.
It makes me feel a little grimy, but you know what? Anyone that likes true crime and they're into that stuff, it's not for me to judge.
Yeah, true crime. I actually really do enjoy true crime. But I don't necessarily have a favorite serial killer. But I started asking this question because I did find that a lot of my guests, especially mental health professionals, do really enjoy true crime. So it's kind of interesting to me to see what backgrounds people come from and how that informs their opinion of what they find fascinating or what they're just like, I don't want to think about this anymore at the end of the day. So yeah. Fusro Doc says they covered the shooting a year later while in grad school at VT. VT? Right, hang on. What is that?
Virginia Tech.
Virginia Tech, okay.
Yeah, Emery, I knew that you were a graduate from there. I didn't realize that you followed it. So yeah, we could definitely talk at some point, and I'd love to pick your brain and see what thoughts you have on it. That would be awesome.
Yep. Can you put some parameters around social justice advocacy for us, kind of what it is and what it isn't?
Yeah, absolutely. In 2002, the American Psychological Association determined that us as psychologists, as therapists, as clinicians need to understand that the communities in which we serve are going to be affected by racial, social issues, any type of discrimination, and that it is our duty to keep tabs on that. But as time has begun to go on, it is more turning into a commitment as psychologists, as doctoral students, as clinicians to put a higher value into those particular experiences in the institutions that are continuing to cause issues and the systems that are continuing to cause issues, and to take action in ways that we think are appropriate. This does not mean that we are bullying clients that hold different views than us. That doesn't mean if I had a individual that was a member of the KKK that I would be needlessly hammering them into the ground about how they need to change their views, but instead doing the work that they need done. And then if there's any room for growth or movement on their end, then I can tackle that way. However, on the flip side of things, it's not outside of a psychologist's right or outside of a psychologist's zone to take things to the justice system, to take things to the political system. So it's kind of finding that fine balance of doing what's best for our clients, but also being heard in the spaces that we haven't been heard in before.
Yeah. I'm glad that you bring up, like, if you don't agree with someone, you can't just necessarily attack them. I've talked to my therapist about this before, specifically whenever I've said, hey, can I refer someone to you? And she said, well, kind of tell me what their issues are. Because she said, I don't see people who struggle with that, or I can refer them to someone else. But it's always interesting to me to see where different people draw the line of, yeah, okay, I can personally, within myself, set aside what I feel and separate that out, because I know that some people really can't. Not that they can't, they really struggle to do so. That's interesting to hear you talk about. So what made you first become interested in the social justice advocacy, specifically, that piece of it?
This is another evolving story. Sorry.
Like I said, I love those.
So from the bat, especially my particular master's program, I started out with a master's and then I went into a doctoral program. And my master's program and my doctoral program are both at the same school, and they focus largely on diversity and inclusion factors in education and making sure that we are fitted with the best knowledge possible to handle diverse and unique situations and clients. But then also we're given the tools in order to be flexible if we don't understand something. So for me, that's already kind of been part of my education from the very first semester in grad school. What ultimately ended up having me take the bull by the horns and start to challenge things and get far more in the advocacy role is my job in residential treatment. I worked with a lot of kids that were taken from their parents when they shouldn't have been taken from their parents, and the residential treatment facility ended up being used as kind of like a foster home instead. Yeah. And you had these kids that typically didn't have a lot of behavioral problems acting out in ways that they didn't act out before because they were trying to survive.
Right.
So that was the first step. And then the next step was community mental health, where I continue to see homeless populations, those that have been continued to be thrown into the justice system when they weren't supposed to be in the justice system. And I work with a lot of kids that aren't getting accommodations and things that they need in school because of their race, because of who their parents are, because they have older siblings that act out in the classroom. So for me, it just kind of, I couldn't be silent anymore about any of that stuff, especially if I continued to see it happening over and over and over and over again.
Right.
You know, to the people that were walking through my door weekly.
Yeah. That's really similar to why I started doing mental health advocacy in general. I'm not a professional. I mean, you can see above, I have the little thing that's not a pro. So that's not me. I'm not a professional in this field. I actually am in marketing for an engineering company. But it's like I had all these experiences, and I just felt like if someone had been that advocate for these other people in my lives, that things would have been different for them. So to personal experiences, just, they kill me, man.
Oh, yeah.
So how do you, as a psychotherapist, go about recognizing injustice for a certain population or even for a specific client? Is that research or studies or talking, or is it something else? Is it just observation? How do you do that now after those experiences that you've already had?
All of the above.
Yeah. Yep.
I'm always learning. I'm always researching. I know specifically recently, I came into an ethical dilemma that actually hit pretty hard up against a social justice advocacy stance that I take. And for me, it took a lot of research. It took a lot of time talking with my supervisor about it, but I ultimately ended up having to do something that was against the stance that I took because I had to protect other people. And it was an active case of tuberculosis in a family that was refusing to get treatment for it.
Wow.
And it was hard because, you know, I had to make an ethical decision to protect other people and to get the family treatment, which meant calling the health department, which triggered other agencies to get involved. And it was like a nightmare for me, except the last thing I want is more agencies involved in families' lives. So definitely research, definitely. And a big thing also is just knowing the community, because the things that my clients are dealing with, where they are getting sent out of the homes that they need, where they're not getting the food stamps that they need, where they're not even like their kids aren't getting like the testing that they need, that's not typically seen in other counties. I was very lucky to work in a county that every child that needed psychological testing at the school, they got it. But I'm currently working in a county, in a community mental health center, that as soon as a kid starts acting up, and it might just be a basic ADHD diagnosis, they're sending them to us and going, medicate them. Just medicate them and deal with it. And I'm like, no, we're not just going to medicate them. Like, they need to get testing. We need to find out if it's a specific learning disorder. And we need to, we need to get all of the other pieces in place. So it's listening, it's understanding. And honestly, one of the big indicators for me is having a client come in and go, I don't know what else to do. I'm hopeless. I've run through every single thing that I can think of. And there is quite literally no other place for me to go at this point other than talking to you about it.
Right.
And for me, and as far as the APA and the ACA goes, it is part of my duty to think outside of the therapy will just help you. What other things can we put in place that's going to help you,
Yeah. We do have a question in the queue. So have you found, where did it go? I started to read it and then it just went off my dang screen. Have you found any communication in your sessions concerning race, framing, and mass media? I ask because there's several studies that racial frames are highly salient when it comes to shootings. Thanks for that question.
I need to reread it.
Go right ahead.
I love you, Emery, but oh, absolutely. I think that's probably one of the biggest things that I deal with. Yes. The population that I work with specifically is high. We have a lot of African Americans and we have a lot of Latinx individuals. And for us, a lot of our violent media, like, or what they're covering as far as violent media goes, is specifically related to what this Black guy is doing or what this Hispanic man is doing, even though that might not necessarily be the case. And specifically in sessions with African American clients that I have, we have to talk about that. You know, there's plenty of studies out there that do show that the media typically tends to focus on individuals of color, individuals that might not have come here legally, or aliens. And that's to, this is a personal opinion, this is not research. For me, it invokes fear. Mm-hmm. And there has to be a conversation with some of my clients, especially when they're young men and they're just beginning to get into this whole idea of, but I need to protect myself, well, I need to do this, well, I need to do that. And I need to go, have you watched the news recently?
Yeah.
Have you read the newspapers? You know, do you notice that cops watch you when you're walking down the street? I mean, and I'm a little white woman. I say that all the time to them, and they laugh hysterically every time I say it. I'm like, I don't have that lived experience that you do, but I am scared that if you continue to act in this way, that you're going to end up in a place that is either going to have you being dead because you're being shot for something that you didn't do, or you're going to end up in the justice system. Mm-hmm. And that has to be a huge part of our conversation, because pay attention to the media, pay attention to your surroundings, and understand that unfortunately the way the scripts are written, they're written against you. Yeah. We're trying to fight against that right now. We're trying to get counter research out against that to show that the violence rates isn't necessarily as high when you take people out of their communities, especially if there's plenty of interpersonal violence in those communities. But there's only so much you can do with talking before it's just kind of like you're telling me what everyone else is telling me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There was actually, the way that you said that, it's just, there's a Black man doing something, there's a Hispanic man doing something, or whatever. There was a study done actually by Nextdoor. This is not a sponsored stream, okay? Nextdoor, if you want to sponsor a stream, I mean, come on. But they actually did a study because a lot of the things that people were posting as urgent, and it was suspicious person, started off with, there's a Black man, there's a Hispanic man, there's a whatever man. And just, they wound up changing their policies where you cannot identify them as just a Black man. You have to say, man in a ball cap, there's a man in a blue shirt, there's a man on a bicycle, those kinds of things. Woman, what, Of course, there are women too, but they actually took that because there was a lot of racial profiling within the posts on the communities on their app, and they wanted to put a stop to that. So I'm hoping that there is some action there behind some of the words too, but definitely if people stop talking about it, people are going to stop paying attention to it. So, yeah. Fustro Doc says, excellent points, thank you. Us media scholars can research what mass media outlets say, but little on the psyche of people watching. Yeah. Do you find it difficult to put yourself in other people's shoes sometimes to get a better understanding of what they are facing? You just mentioned, you're a white woman, and if you're talking to someone else, how do you overcome that?
Just having extreme empathy. And even then, that's not enough. And I'm completely honest with my clients about that. Quite a lot of the clients that I have that I really enjoy is I have a lot of African American mothers. They're typically late 30s, early 40s, that after feeling like they've gone through so much and they finally hit that wall of hopelessness, they're like, well, you're not a mother. Well, you're a little white girl. And I'm just like, yeah, I am. And I'm like, and I will never be able to understand what you've gone through. I can't, because even if I attempt to put myself in the shoes of, what if I decided to shave off all of my hair one day? Well, that's still becoming more acceptable, and I'm still white. It's understanding with extreme empathy that regardless of what they're particularly going through, whether it's racial discrimination, whether it is discrimination because they have multiple kids, whether it's discrimination because they work 2 jobs and they are barely home with their kids and their kids are getting into trouble, it's the fact that this person has come from a place of extreme hopelessness, and all of the systems that they hope will help them, or all the systems that they are trying to avoid, are against them. And that they finally come to this point that seeking therapy is just something that they need in order to give them the skills in order to cope with it. And if that's the only thing that I can do besides get angry with them when they get angry, that's fine. Do I want to do more? Absolutely. But I mean, you're not going to see me walking the 5 blocks down to City Hall and like banging on the door every day, because they're not going to want me there anymore.
So once you recognize and understand what your client is up against, does that then tie into the therapy? Do you talk specifically about the things that they're facing that are maybe an injustice? And then kind of how do you do that?
Up until we do. But for me specifically, I will only take on talking about things that I know I'm comfortable talking about. I cannot share the lived experience of minorities. I can't share the lived experience of those that, came over here illegally but have done what they could in order to survive here, and they're still fighting for their right to be here. I can't share in those lived experiences. But what I can do is I can say, this is a place of hopelessness. This is a place you are coming here because this is a place of safety, and a place that you're just going to get a little more extra help. Let me hold you in those moments when you really need someone to hold you. And then if I can connect them with resources, if I can connect them with peer support groups, like that's what I end up doing. Because if they need somebody to go, I live your experience and I understand, and I'm just as angry and frustrated and sad and hopeless as you are, I'd prefer that they get that from them, and then we'll work on everything else.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have another question from R Potter TGT16. I need my glasses on for these, I think. Their question is, a lot of my clients believe that if they avoid fights, they will be seen as cowards. How do you advocate around that? I like that question.
It's an excellent question. And I bet he's smiling because he knows that I do have an answer to it, but I'm going to sit here and think about it.
Well, I think that that's a really good question, because I know a lot of people that are like that they're, if they are confronted, like they have to respond, right? Because it's the manly thing to do, or it's the brave thing to do, or it's the right response. You can't run away from a fight, those kinds of things.
Exactly. So in the moment, in the immediate, one of the things that I typically talk to them, I do the typical, I want to say it's like the mom thing, where it's like, if your friend jumped off a bridge, would you follow them? And in most cases, they're like, well, this doesn't make any sense. What we try to do is we try to think of ways that they can assert their masculinity where they're not putting themselves in harm's way. That is, if they avoid the fight, it's not more of a, oh, I'm punking out, but it's more of a, you're not worth my time. Now, for the particular population that I know that Potter's referring to, that's very hard to do that. In a lot of cases, if they find themselves in this cycle of violence and in this cycle of like having to prove themselves to be the big man on the block, it's, doing what I can to make sure that they're safe and to make sure that they're not doing anything that's going to get them severely harmed. And then having conversations about how long can you actually keep this up and how safe can you actually be in the long run acting like this. And then challenging them on that foot and focusing on the strengths that they do have and trying to determine ways that they can prove their masculinity or they can prove that they're strong without actually having, to go fist to fist with somebody. That's still very hard. I still know a lot of my teenage boys that I work with that would still prefer to fight. But it's a work in progress. Yeah. It is a slow but sure work in progress. And once they start to see the benefits of not fighting all the time and the anxiety that's reduced because they don't have to do that anymore and the safety that they have, knowing that they have other things in place, that's normally when I start to see the switch over.
Yeah. I mean, you're talking about teens, but hell, I know adults who are like that. So
fair.
And my oldest is, what's today? So in 9 days, he turns 18, and he has just gotten past the point where his immediate response to any challenge is fighting. So I'm glad he's gotten there, but yeah, teenagers and hormones, man. Hormones and the culture they're brought up in, and just golly, it's a challenge.
That was the worst part about residential treatment. It got to the point that it was like, there's little old 5'2" me, and then I've got like 2 teenagers that are like 6 feet on either side of me, and I'm like, are you serious?
Yeah.
Are you serious right now? I'm like, I know you are both smarter than this. I know you are both mentally stronger than this. I'm like, sit down. Like, I can't deal with this. And it's kind of funny because then after that, they're like, oh, like, Miss got in the way. But
yep. Yeah, if you do get in between, because my 18-year-old, almost 18-year-old, he is much taller than I am. Like, he's a full head above me, and also he's very broad-shouldered and very muscular, and it's like I have no problem getting in between him and someone else if I need to, because I'm like, you just got to do what you got to do. But it's good that they listen, at least in the moment. So what has been the hardest challenge that you have faced related to social justice advocacy?
Continuing to hit a wall and not being heard. I think that's the biggest thing that I've had to run into. That seems like an obvious one, but the places that I feel the most frustrated are trying not to call out any agencies too much. I will say this with the caveat of, I know that these places do their best with the personnel and the resources that they have. But the 2 biggest places where I typically run into issues are with children and youth, that they're also called DHS or children family services, whatever they are, depending on county or state. I've got a lot of minority mothers that are almost typically threaten to have their kids taken away for minor infractions. And then I have non-minority mothers that have to like practically be caught abusing their kids. Right. And then that's when OCY finally gets involved. And that's a frustration of mine because I've talked to caseworkers, I've talked to case investigators, like I've called people to be like, I know you have my tip, I know you have everything I said on file, I know you have my assessment on file, but this is why I think that this is unfair, or this is why I'm concerned about the welfare of this child. Yeah. And to get kind of thank you, we'll take what you have to say into consideration, and then get the letter a few weeks later where it's like, well, this was unfounded despite everything that you told us. And I'm like, I saw the bruise on the kid. Yeah. And that's typically where I begin to find myself like having this really like deep anger about it. And one of the reasons why I'm trying to fix what I can, how I can, by making connections with some of these caseworkers, by developing better relationships, by explaining our side of things a little bit better. And then other than that, it's the schools, schools that they've got a lot of kids that have a lot of either issues because of their home life, because of the area that they grow up in, and they're showing their symptoms in the school instead of outside of the school because it's safer to do that. And then the schools not being able to accommodate their learning needs, and then them getting lost in the system and unable to graduate and all of that. So I think those are my two big heartaches, and where I find the most difficulty with going. I'm doing everything that I can, but it still doesn't feel like it's enough.
Yeah, we Child Protective Services here, at least in Texas, is I mean, a lot of people do have to get caught in the act of abusing their kids, and they have no way of addressing mental or verbal abuse either, and that's frustrating to me in particular, on a couple different levels. But it's one of those things. I know people who work for CPS as well, and I know that they are good people and that they do the best that they can, but they've flat out told me we can only do so much. Like, we have so many cases that it's a miracle if we can even glance at every case in a given day. So I know that they're resource constrained and funding constrained and everything, but I hear you. That's a frustration even whenever you're not dealing with them all the time. Mm-hmm. So, and then I have a couple of friends who have been reported to CPS and had their kids yanked out of school in the middle of the day with no warning, and then they go to pick up their kid and they haven't even been notified, and it's over, nothing. Something that happened at a grocery store or whatever, and it's like, that can't be right. Just because
your lunch money.
Right. It hurts me that if it was my kid as a white woman, they probably wouldn't have even looked at it twice. But because this was a friend who's African American, like, she actually had to struggle to prove. And how do you prove that there's no anything going on? And it's just, that's heartbreaking to me.
Yeah.
So. I would love to hear more about the Landerholmstead.
I wish I would have warned the CEO so she could watch, because I'm sure she would love this. I'll
post it to YouTube eventually. It's like I'm so behind.
So the mission of the Landerholmstead is that it is currently an agricultural site that educates on resiliency techniques, self-sufficiency, alternative housing operations. Pretty much what Rebecca Landerholm, who founded the Landerholmstead, wants to do is create a sustainable homestead in which individuals that are unable to afford their own housing, that want to live an eco-sustainable lifestyle, have a place to go. One of the big things that we really want to focus on is we want to focus on the homeless population, those that are disabled, recovering addicts, former inmates, populations that are typically given resources, but maybe not enough resources in order to make their lives sustainable past a certain point. So it's all about creating this community and creating this homestead, but then also giving tools in order to create a sustainable, resilient farmstead and lifestyle. So it's really cool. It's a bunch of mishmash of a lot of really good things.
And it just sounds so cool. Like, every aspect of what you just said is really heckin' cool. So you did bring up something that just kind of, I'm going to take us back for a second, and then we can keep going forward. But you mentioned kind of former inmates. Do you work a lot with that population in a social justice advocacy realm as well?
Yes. Specifically in my community mental health job, I actually see a lot of, particularly, they like to give me young men that just got out of a few year stints. I don't know how I ended up becoming the Pied Piper of that group, but I am. And there's a pretty big, large state prison near where my work is. And then there's also a mental health facility for those that they consider the criminally insane. And then there's the smaller county jail, super close to where I work. Yeah. So that's a huge population that I end up working with.
That's I've had couple of guests who've brought up working either in a criminal justice system while they're in prison or in jail, or with people afterwards. And my grandfather actually used to work. He was not in a mental health professional either, but he was a pastor, and he was part of the program that they went and did Bible study and everything at different prisons. And he actually said it was one of his most rewarding things that he ever did was that. And he went on all kinds of mission trips and all sorts of other things. And he just always came back to no, working in prisons and going and doing that kind of service was always the thing that really, really got to his heart, and that he looked back on at the end of his life and really said he was thankful that he got the opportunity to do that. Fusro Doc has another question here. So, what are some strong social justice resources for educators to help students understand this empathetic viewpoint?
That is an excellent question, and I will get back to you on that. There are definitely some good websites and specifically good research articles that break it down super, super nice about, this is what you need to be looking for. This is how we talk to people. These are things that you should be moving towards. And then on the other side, there's just like the catch-all, like, here you go, educators. Actually, I think I have a specific article that I can share with you, and then Emery as well, about, tying in social justice work. It's specifically more to psych students, but you might be able to use it in communication studies, I think. I hope.
Yeah, absolutely. If you'll share it with me, I'll tweet it out later too, and share it with anybody who's interested in it. So going back, taking us forward again, how did you get involved with the Thelander Homestead, and how does it kind of dovetail into your work as a psychotherapist? How did you get involved with the Thelander Homestead, and how does it kind of dovetail into your work as a psychotherapist?
So, the head of the Thelander Homestead, the founder, the CEO, and the president of the board of directors, Rebecca Landerholm, is actually a friend of mine from college. So that's the big thing. She was somebody that she initially started out as my boss, and I respect her tenfold. She is a visionary. She's somebody that's always been good to people. She recently, so some of our operations have slowed down because she had twins, and she is one of those that, she's one of those that she's got both babies strapped to her, and she's got like her younger kid in tow, and she's like handing out things to people when she sees them. For the longest time, her son was like 3 or 4, and she'd have him in the car seat, and she'd be driving around to look for the homeless camps, and she'd like get out and like give stuff to them. So this whole idea of this homestead is tying in a bunch of really big passions for her and trying to help the community, especially in the Seattle area as a whole. And there's a large homeless population in Seattle and in a little further south, I think, in Aberdeen. So amazing woman. And when she was looking for board of directors, I was just kind of like, I don't know, if this is my thing. And she was like, I would love to have you. She's like, you need to go through a vote and everyone else needs to like you. And I'm like, okay. She's like, but I would love to have you, just because like, I know you, I know what you're about. I know the things that you're passionate about, come in line with what our organization is. And I applied and they liked me. So that's how I ended up on the board. It ends up really dovetailing into my work because these are populations that I also see in community mental health. And, out here in Pennsylvania, we have various resources for that stuff, but it's nothing as holistic as this. We're hoping that once the actual homestead gets up and running, we can have a mental health professional there, just to have somebody that checks in, not necessarily to be a therapist, but just to check in, to evaluate, to have like people that can drive. So those that need to make appointments can do that, especially those that need to check in with POs. It seems to be at least a little slice of good that we can do to help all of these populations that at times I feel hopeless trying to help in my day-to-day life.
Yeah. It just the whole thing. I can't get over how cool it all sounds. Well, that's really neat. If you haven't looked at the website yet, it's got all sorts of. There's a blog. I actually didn't get a chance to look at the recipes, but I know that there's a link for recipes as well. And now I have pulled it up, and the first thing is a lemon lime pound cake recipe. And yes, please, just yeah, that sounds great.
She loves baking. After she got her creative writing journalism. Oh man, she won't be happy with me because I don't remember one of the writing degrees. After she got that at our undergraduate university, she ended up getting a certificate in agriculture, eco-sustainability at this university school called Baylor. I think it's Baylor. And she learned so much just about cross-planting and about, things you can make just with stuff that you grow. And she loves to cook. So that's one of the things that she's doing. And she's really, really hoping that once the homestead gets up and running, that's going to be one of the things that she can focus on is the kitchen.
Yeah.
And hiring a cook for that and being able to try all these recipes and to feed the people that are in the community.
Yeah. That's really cool. Did Baylor in Texas?
I don't think so. No.
Okay.
That's why I'm saying Baylor and I'm like, oh, maybe not.
That's okay. I was just curious. All right. So she just had twins, and you said she has another child as well, and she still has time to bake?
Yes.
I don't know how she does it. And do all of this? That's a miracle woman right there.
She is. Her and I... Oh, Bastyr. That's where she's from. Bastyr University. Her and I like to joke about that because she loves to take stuff on and she loves to be busy. And I'm very much the same way. So she's the one person I can go to and I'm like, guess who took on another project that I don't have time for? And she's like, proud of you.
I am generally the same. Not in the past couple years, though. They've been a little bit rough for me. But I used to volunteer for so much crap that my coworkers actually bought me a magnet that says stop me before I volunteer again. Because they were just like, woman, you physically cannot do anything else or you're just going to run on 3 hours of sleep every night. So I get that. I just also did get to a point where I was like, yeah, no, I can't do that anymore. Although now I have a coworker so I live in Fort Worth, Texas, and it's a pretty big city. And I've lived here since 2015. So for 5 years, I've lived here. She moved here last year and she knows more about Fort Worth than I do. And she's just like, she moved here from New Orleans. And she is so versed on everything in Fort Worth. And she's on so many different committees that I didn't even know existed. And I'm just going, what are you doing? Oh, but she's great. I don't want to hear about food at 10:30 at night. Yeah, I know. So is there an overall well-being strategy you would recommend to anyone with or without any underlying disorder? Just a general, everybody get 9 hours of sleep type thing?
Actually, I was talking to a friend of mine about this earlier. One of the ways that I specifically and that I think he does too, is we're able to express things through music. And that is something that I've just honestly within the past 2 or 3 years have started saying to especially my teenagers, like, you can't tell me what this is, express it to me through music. So with that, just well-being strategies, find the music that you need for how you're feeling and dive into it. Don't dive into it too much, especially if it's really sad and depressing stuff and that's how you're feeling.
Yeah.
But explore it, be curious to it, understand that it might be there for a reason that you don't understand, and then pull out from it. And if that's the way that you need to share how you're feeling with somebody else, then share the music.
Yeah. I love that. Are you a musician yourself? Do you play anything?
Yes and no. I play the violin and cello. I have not played cello in years though, so I kind of feel like I should take that off my list. But I am a violin player. The last time I played was about 2 years ago. I need to pick that back up again.
I played French horn in high school, and I'll still call myself a French horn player. Yeah, I like your caveat though of pulling yourself back out of the music, because I have definitely experienced where I listen whenever I edit. Like I said, I'm in marketing, so I edit a lot. Whenever I edit, I put on music that doesn't have words, and I had gotten to a point in my playlist where it was these really strong piano pieces. And then halfway through the day, I found myself just really angry for no reason. And I took out my headphones and I was just like, oh, wait, I feel better. Oh.
Yeah, sometimes you're like, wow, this feels good that that I'm listening to something that really like resonates with me in the moment. And then you get so lost in it after a while that like you have to pull yourself from it. Because once you pull yourself from it, you're like, okay, I can breathe again. It's okay. It's all good.
Yep. And I just switched over like Piano Guys or something a little milder. But yeah, no, music is to me is a great outlet. It's a great way to change your mood as well sometimes. I like that strategy. I think it's good. And also, I feel like it's implementable for almost everyone.
That's why I like bringing it up. It's very rare that I talk to a teenager or even somebody that's, a little older, and I'm just like, music. I'm like, express it through music to me. And, and then they're like, okay, I can do that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and it's one of those things that if you share music with someone else, like you're sharing something that you enjoy with them. I know when my daughter brings me a song, even if I don't necessarily like the song that she brings, we don't exactly have the same taste in music. But even if it's something that I don't necessarily enjoy, I'm like, I really appreciate you sharing that with me. I like it. It's good. So we do have another question from K-Dog. Are you planning on tackling any new projects in the future that you're looking forward to? I love that question.
Wow. I have a lot of rolling ongoing projects. I am an audio editor and producer of 2 podcasts. So that's just continuous for me. Trying to get those rolling and sustainable and getting larger listenerships would be awesome. So that's a big one. I actually on Friday am figuring out where I get matched for my last year of the program. So for us, we go through what like doc students, like med students go through. For residency, we call clinical internship. And Friday morning, sometime between 7 and 10 a.m., I'm going to get an email that's going to tell me where I'm going. And at that point, it's when I need to start prioritizing any and all future projects. So that's a huge thing that's coming down the pike to me. It definitely feels like a high-speed train hurtling towards me. It's only a few days away. But other than that, like I have made a lot of really excellent connections through the video game and psychology and communications world, and continuing to do projects with them and collaborate with them is huge. I think I'm in the midst of writing something for Take This right now.
So nice.
Those are a few of my exciting things.
Yeah. I love Take This. Everything about Take This is wonderful. Sorry, my puppy is like, I can't tell if he wants to go out or if he's just over there. So if you could change one thing about the mental health field or people's views of mental health professionals or educators, what would it be?
It's an excellent question.
I like to start with a like, this could be easy or hard, and I like to kind of wrap it up with this could be easy or hard too.
One thing about mental health field, people's views of mental health professionals and educators, what would it be? I think the biggest thing that I can say is we are not as uniform as you think we are. I think that's the one thing. I have some people that think that psychologists and therapists and clinicians and the people that do that educating they're looking for stuff, like the whole like, are you psychoanalyzing me thing? They're looking for specific stuff about you every time they talk about you. And that's not the case. And then on the opposite ends of things, everyone that is a psychology professor or a therapist or a psychologist, we're not Some of them aren't necessarily super open about everything. I tend to fall more on the open end of the spectrum. So for me, it's trying to communicate with people that, yes, you might have had this one experience with this one professional where they seem to be trying to pigeonhole you into giving answers, and that you could say something and it was the wrong thing. I'm not that way. You are not going to get in trouble with me because you're expressing, even just my friends, like, you're not going to get in trouble with me because you're expressing an opinion. You're not going to get in trouble with me because you say that you need space. What's going to get you in trouble with me is if you don't communicate with me.
Yeah.
So that's the big thing. Just give us a little bit of flexibility and realize that we are just as multidimensional as the people that you pass in your day-to-day life.
No, I think that that's completely fair. And, you know, we talk all the time, especially on the show on Mondays, just that, you know, mental health professionals are people. That's the bottom line. I'm a person at my day job. Y'all are people at your day jobs. It's just that your day job, people tend to put you kind of on a different pedestal and put different expectations on you without even really getting to know you as a person. And I think the same thing with educators as well. Like and I catch myself doing it too with my kids' teachers. I'm like, well, why did you do it this way? And fortunately, most of my kids' teachers have been able to just come back and say, well, here's why I did. What's the problem? What's the problem with it? You know, let's get down and talk about it. But I think that that's a lot of misunderstandings are just about not recognizing that other people doing professional jobs are people. That's it.